7 self-sabotaging trading traits that bleed your account dry. Here is the hook you did not see coming. Greed is not the villain. The absence of a finish line is. You call it ambition. You wrap it in talk about growth. Then you sit with no definition of enough, no ceiling, no walk-away line, and act surprised when the market treats your open mouth like a donation jar. Greed without a plan is drift with louder music. It feels like momentum. It is just noise. Your first point hits hardest: greed with no plan. Call it unstructured appetite. After a win, the appetite swells. Not because the setup improved, but because the brain is high on novelty and the illusion of certainty. The hand feels hot. The mind whispers that you are owed a victory lap. Then the plan disappears, because there never was one. No threshold where profit becomes cash. No level where risk gets cut on purpose. No time boundary where a trade gets closed for being stale. Look at the line you gave me. How much is enough? When to stop? Without those 2 rails, every small win recruits you into oversized size, late entries, and that slippery thing called just one more. Entries, to get worse, because the mind chases the prior feeling, not the current structure. Stops get wider because the mind bargains for a miracle. Take profit turns into a mirage, because you are not trading a setup anymore. You are trading a mood. Mood is not a strategy. Mood never paid a bill. There is a difference between ambition and open-ended hunger. Ambition carries targets, invalidations, and conversion points where unrealized turns into realized. Open-ended hunger carries slogans. It says, "Let it run," while ignoring the context that made the entry valid. It says, "Ride the trend," while skipping the part where continuation needs fresh confirmation, not wishful thinking. The edge that got you in is not the same as the excuse that keeps you in. Confuse those, and the bleed begins. And yes, the same mouth that chants, "Cut your losses hard," suddenly forgets how to cut anything when the candle wiggles against the fantasy. Unstructured appetite has a nasty cousin, post-win tilt. Many think tilt only follows pain. No. It often shows up after success. The win feeds entitlement. Size creeps up because the last trade felt easy. Risk tolerance stretches because the mind craves the same dopamine, with a bigger trophy. Then the green day turns into a red week because the appetite had no container. Profit, unbanked, is bait. The market loves anglers who leave their bait in the water. Now, the maintenance costs. Overtrading becomes default, because there is no scenario where standing down counts as progress. Chasing becomes frequent, because enough never arrives. So every late move looks like a bus you cannot miss. Averaging down becomes seductive, because booking the loss would confess that the appetite was blind. And when a spike finally goes your way, the scale out never happens, because there was never a ladder. That is not patience. That is a prayer with a chart behind it. The account bleeds slowly, then all at once, and the post-mortem reads like a bad joke, got wrecked on a pump and dump after a so-called victory day. You wrote, "Greed without a plan leads to paying a heavy price after winning trades." Correct. The pain often arrives after green, not after red. The loss that hurts most is the one you manufacture by refusing to exit a good trade with good money in hand. The chart did not betray you. Hope did. The missing finish line did. If the account could talk, it would not complain about greed. It would complain about missing architecture, no profit boundary, no risk throttle, no clean handoff from open risk to banked cash. And the longer that architecture stays missing, the more a win becomes fertilizer for the next drawdown. Strip the mask off and another face appears. Greed gets all the blame because it is easy to hate. But envy sits under it, quiet and sticky, and surfaces the moment you watch someone else take profit while you keep fantasizing about a bigger number. The fantasy stings. The ego snarls. The commentary turns bitter. And now, culture creeps in, sneering at winners, mocking entries you did not take, building walls where bridges should be. If the finish line keeps missing, what fills the vacuum other than envy pretending to be insight? Part 1, 690 words, analysis density, 90%. The lack of a finish line breeds something uglier than greed. It breeds that jealous, hater culture you called out. The minute enough disappears, every other trader's screenshot turns into a personal insult. Their green becomes your red, even when you are flat. That is how an account gets bled by emotions before a single candle prints. You stare at someone else's exit and decide your own profit was small. Not because the chart said so, but because envy did. No worries. Right. Scroll a little more. The mind starts scorekeeping with strangers. You call it community. It is just a public scoreboard for a private insecurity. Without a finish line. Comparison does the job for you. Every win becomes inadequate. Every loss becomes unforgivable. And since hating is easier than precision, the commentary turns sharp in all the wrong places. You critique entries you never planned to take. You clown exits you never sized for. You attack results you never earned. That tone has a cost. Here is the cost. Feedback dries up. People stop sharing nuance with you because you broadcast contempt instead of curiosity. The room still talks, but the oxygen is gone. The only voices left are those who confirm your frustration. So the feed tilts, more outrage, less craft, more morale theater, less method. The market does not care about the theater. The market only measures whether your decisions are coherent. And jealous culture shreds coherence by teaching you to react to people first and structure second. Let me put a mirror in front of this. The attack usually hides the same weakness you refuse to face. You slam someone's profit-taking as timid, while you ride a green trade into a full round trip because you did not define a harvest point. You jeer someone's stop as too tight, while your own stop keeps expanding like elastic, because admitting invalidation would bruise the ego. You call someone's patience lucky, while your own entries come from fear of missing a bus that never belonged to you. The hate is not analysis. It is a tell. Jealous culture also loves post hoc wisdom. After a move finishes, suddenly everyone knew. That chorus poisons your internal scoreboard. It tells you certainty was available if you were smarter. It tells you there was a perfect entry and a perfect exit, and you missed both because, obviously, you are not built for this. The mind internalizes that lie and starts chasing certainty instead of odds. Then you look for guarantees in a game that pays in probabilities. That is how envy becomes an execution problem. That is how you get wrecked on a perfectly fine setup by turning it into a referendum on self-worth. Notice the pattern. Jealous culture trains you to place your self-respect outside the terminal. If respect is out there, in someone else's P&L, then every candle threatens your identity. Each tick becomes personal. Now you are primed for the worst habit in this business, trading as emotional regulation. You click not because the setup matured, but because the feed stung. You scale not because volatility contracted, but because the crowd celebrated. You hold, not because structure supports it, but because letting go would feel like losing a debate you started in your head. Another bleed. The more you posture, the less you journal. You will not write what you actually did. because the page might expose what the comments tried to hide. So the data disappears. The patterns stay blurry. The repair never gets started. You call it grit and grind. It is just noise with a heroic caption. Without a finish line, envy needs fresh fuel. Without honest records, you cannot prove your own mind wrong. So the loop keeps spinning. Attack, compare, chase, regret, repeat. Strip it down and the signal is clear. Jealous culture is not just rude. It is expensive. It shifts your attention from process to people, from entry logic to entertainment, from risk to reputation. And reputational trading has one destination: overreaction. The heartbeat accelerates when the room cheers. The hand trembles when the room jeers. The next decision comes from adrenaline, not a plan. If the finish line is missing and the feed is steering, what comes next other than the most predictable blow-up in this game? That raw, unfiltered, runaway emotion masquerading as conviction. Emotion is not just present in your trading. It is the hidden broker taking secret fees on every click. The jealous culture from before primes the pump. Then, raw feeling grabs the wheel and calls itself conviction. That is how a decent setup becomes a hostage situation. The chart prints data. The body prints drama. And drama pays in slippage. Too emotional sounds soft. It is not. It is expensive. The heart rate spikes and suddenly risk looks cheap. The palms sweat and suddenly time looks abundant. Fear paints every candle as a threat. So you flinch out early and pretend it was discipline. Euphoria paints every candle as a promise. So you overstay and call it patience. Those words feel noble when spoken. They look fake when audited. The market is brutal partly because it mirrors you. Exposed nerves create distorted reads. You start seeing meaning in noise and danger in structure. An ordinary pullback becomes a betrayal. A routine consolidation becomes a grand setup because you are hungry for action. Now the feeling decides the frame. A bearish hiccup feels personal, so you widen the stop a little. A bullish blip feels validating, so you add size a little. A little, until the position is no longer the trade you opened. It is a different animal wearing the same ticker. You called it. Clearly, in finance, there is no room for feelings. I will sharpen that. Feeling always shows up. The error is letting it manage risk. When emotion manages risk, the stop is not a line. It is a suggestion. The target is not a plan. It is a fantasy. The clock is not a boundary. It is an accessory. That is why exits arrive either too early, out of panic, or too late, out of pride. Both feel justified in the moment. Both leave the same residue, regret. There are two common flavors of emotional bleed: the revenge flame and the victory high. The revenge flame demands immediate payback after a loss. It is not about recouping capital. It is about repairing ego. Fast. Size creeps up not because variance shrank, but because humiliation hurts. Entries rush not because the signal matured, but because silence feels unbearable. The victory high is trickier. It calls itself flow. It is just intoxication. After a green run, the mind quietly upgrades its self-image and downgrades caution. The next trade is bigger, looser, later. Then the market slaps once, and the whole tower shakes because the confidence was borrowed, not earned. Another blind corner. Emotional state becomes the hidden time frame. You think you are trading one structure. Your mood secretly shortens or lengthens the hold. Fear forces scalps out of swing plans. Greed forces bag holding out of intraday plans. The P&L becomes a thermostat for behavior rather than a readout. When green, you crave more green and refuse to bank. When red, you crave redemption and refuse to leave. The screen did not change. Your state did. Notice how emotion also rewrites memory. You will swear the plan allowed wider risk because widening felt necessary. You will claim the target was always higher because euphoria needed a reason to hold. You will insist the setup was invalid from the start because shame needs an alibi for exiting at the bottom. That rewrite contaminates the next plan. You are not just emotional in the present. You are rebuilding history to protect the feeling. Now, imagine stacking that for weeks. Imagine auditing it honestly. The gap between what you say you do and what you actually do becomes a canyon. And then comes the cruelest part. Emotion sells itself as gut. Traders love calling it instinct when it works and bad luck when it burns. But gut, without receipts, is just impulse in a leather jacket. You know the line about cutting losses hard. Under stress, the blade goes dull. You know the line about letting winners breathe. Under euphoria, the leash disappears and the dog bolts into traffic. The language stays heroic. The behavior stays reactive. Strip the buzzwords, and the pattern is simple. Feelings turn risk into negotiation. Every micro move becomes a debate against yourself. The market is not beating you. You are haggling with your own fear and pride while price walks away. The more you negotiate, the more you train yourself to believe that terms can be changed mid-flight without consequences. That belief is comforting. It is also the gateway to the next flaw on your list, the quiet, polite, account-killing habit of lying to yourself about what just happened, what you planned, and what you will pretend to improve next time. If emotion keeps steering the trade, what do you think happens when truth shows up and asks for the journal? Naivete loves pretty words. Reality loves ledgers. You named it clean, not being honest with yourself. That is not a soft flaw. That is the ghost in the machine. Emotion got the Balan wheel in the last part. Now watch how dishonesty rewrites the GPS in real time so the wreck looks like a scenic route. The mind cannot stand the pain of being wrong, so it starts repainting the chart with excuses. That repaint is not free. It costs precision, it costs time, and eventually it costs balance. Here's the naive version. I am disciplined. I follow my plan. I cut losses hard. I let winners run. It sounds tight. It sounds pro. It also evaporates the moment the candle disrespects ego. Then the harsh version shows up in the account. Stop becomes elastic. Target becomes vapor. And the plan mysteriously expands to fit whatever you feel like doing. That gap between the slogan and the behavior is the bill. The market mails that bill with interest. Dishonesty does not always sound like a lie. It often sounds like context. The volatility was unusual. The spread widened. The news came out of nowhere. All of that can be true sometimes. But when it becomes the default alibi, the pattern is obvious. The variable never lives in you. It always lives out there. Out there is convenient. Out there cannot be measured. Out there cannot be fixed. A trader who cannot find fault on the inside will keep searching outside forever and call it research. Compare the two worlds. In the naive world, the chart is an accessory for feelings. Data bends to justify the hold. The post-trade note is a fairy tale written by ego after the fact. In the real world, the chart is a mirror. If the plan said, invalidate at a level and the position survived past that level, you are not patient. You are negotiating with pain. If the plan said take partial at a level and you ignored it, and you are not letting it breathe, you are worshiping a bigger number that only exists in your head. The difference between story and structure is the difference between a scratch and a blow-up. Here is the most expensive corner of dishonesty, the journal you keep for show. Pretty screenshots. Cherry-picked commentary. P&L redacted like a government memo. You tell yourself it is motivational. It is not. It is camouflage. The moment a record threatens the brand, the record gets edited. Then the edit becomes habit. Then the habit becomes identity. Now you are not trading anymore. You are curating. You are defending a character you built online instead of building a method you can repeat offline. A curated trader gets clapped by uncurated variants. Another angle. When the mind refuses to be wrong, the definitions drift. Risk stops being a fixed unit and becomes a vibe. Invalidation stops being a boundary and becomes a suggestion. Review stops being an audit and becomes a pep talk. You do not improve rules. You improve rationalizations. And the rationalizations grow sophisticated. They borrow technical words. They mimic precision. But they show their teeth when you ask for timestamps and size. If the receipts cannot be produced without blushing, and the improvement was theater. Theater does not pay. Theater only kills time until the next margin call. Let us now place naive thinking right next to harsh reality. Naive thinking says honesty is about feelings. I felt scared. I felt greedy. I felt off. Harsh reality says honesty is about math. I risked 1 unit and leaked 3. I moved my stop twice. I skipped my partials and turned green into dust. One is a diary entry. The other is a repair invoice. Only one can be used to calibrate the next decision. Only one keeps you from repeating the exact same wound with a different excuse. The ugliest part is how sustained dishonesty rewires taste. After enough edits, the unedited truth feels rude. Plain numbers feel like an attack. Clean invalidation feels heartless. You will call hard data negative and soft self-talk grit. Then, when somebody presents a cold breakdown of your own actions, you will hear insult instead of help. That is how a trader drifts into isolation while pretending to be independent. The edge erodes quietly because feedback no longer fits your self-image. And then the loop you constructed becomes airtight. No finish line. Jealous culture. Our runaway. Emotion. And selective honesty. A perfect ecosystem for denial. When the next spike forms, you will not ask what the setup demands. You will ask what your identity can tolerate. When the next drawdown hits, you will not ask where variance ends and incompetence begins. You will ask who to blame. The questions tell the truth. You refuse to write. If honesty is unwelcome and ego edits every receipt, what voice sneaks in to fill the silence, other than the loudest one on your feed, that stampede of FOMO dressed up as certainty? Herd thinking pretends to be safety. It is just outsourced fear. When jealousy and self-editing have done their damage, the stampede looks comforting because it drowns the sound of your own doubt. The feed screams certainty. The candles lurch. And suddenly the exit you planned turns into a referendum on whether you belong in the room. That is not analysis. That is crowd anesthesia. You named it plain, FOMO, the bandwagon impulse. The cost is not just bad entries. The cost is identity leased to other people's urgency. When the crowd twitches, you twitch. When the crowd freezes, you freeze. The only thing that stays independent is the bill your account pays for their emotions. An escape route does not treat the crowd as a compass. It treats it as weather. Weather can be read. Weather cannot be obeyed. The moment the timeline decides your timing, the trade stops being yours. Now the risk is sized for their story, not your receipts. Now the invalidation level belongs to their conviction, not your model. And when heat rises, borrowed conviction runs first. The exit turns into a stampede jammed at the same door. The chart will feel rigged. It is not. It is crowded by tourists who refuse to carry maps. Next comes the soft addiction dressed as community service, secondhand analysis. You wrote it sharply, liking free calls, leaning on someone else's take, treating other people's work as a meal ticket. Free food lives in a mousetrap. That line is not cute. It is physics. The cheaper the conviction, the faster it evaporates under pressure. The more you outsource decisions, the less you can hold size when the candle whips. The screen will ask a simple question: if the idea was borrowed, who is going to press the button when it hurts the lender or you? Silence answers. The escape route here looks like ownership, not a motivational poster. Ownership as in timestamps that match your voice, risk that matches your stomach, exits that match your plan. That perspective kills the fantasy that there is a magic feed where certainty lives. There is only probability and position. The feed can inform mood. The receipts inform reality. Without ownership, you do not trade. You cosplay. And cosplay cannot survive a liquidity sweep. Now, the quiet wrecking ball, impatience. You called it well, the constant itch to be in a position, the need to have something to look at, the obsession with entries as a form of self-soothing. Impatience sells itself as hunger. It is just fear of silence. Silence forces thought. Thought forces definitions. Definitions put a leash on impulse. So the mind picks noise over silence and calls it hustle. The result is a calendar full of clicks and a P&L full of air. Reframing impatience is not about virtue. It is about arithmetic. Flat is a position with risk at zero and optionality intact. That line is not romantic. It is brutal math. When patience shows up, the entry improves by default because the signal had time to confirm or die. When patience shows up, the stop needs fewer edits because you did not bargain your way into a late seat on a fast train. When patience shows up, the take profit feels less like a betrayal because it was outlined before the dopamine flood. You can call that boring. The ledger calls it oxygen. Link the three: herd impulse, borrowed conviction, and impatience, and the loop is obvious. The crowd moves. You borrow. You rush. The move stalls. You improvise. You rationalize. Then you repeat and blame volatility for a discipline problem. The alternative path does not need heroics. It needs an internal scoreboard that stays louder than the feed, a finish line that stays visible after green, and a journal that refuses to flatter you. That frame does not ask for perfection. It asks for consistency, measurable in receipts, not rants. Here is the bitter medicine. The market pays those who can be alone in a crowded room. Alone does not mean isolated. It means unconfused about who is accountable for the next click. If the crowd is weather, if advice is reference, not orders, if flat counts as progress when noise dominates, then the old loop loses air. The hand stops shaking when the screenshot appears. The heat inside a candle stops feeling like judgment. The trade returns to being a contract with yourself, not a popularity contest you can never win. All of this points toward a single synthesis. Finish line defined, envy diffused, emotion seated, honesty armed, crowd demoted, patience restored, a full circuit. The account does not need a savior. It needs a system that can hold shape when the feed shouts and the body begs. That system cannot be borrowed. It can only be built. So if the escape route looks this plain, what is left, other than fusing these pieces into one ruthless operating rhythm that survives the next storm without asking the crowd for permission? Clarity is not poetic. Clarity is plumbing. The leaks stop when the pipes fit. Greed without a finish line was the first leak. Envy turned every stranger's P&L into your thermostat. Emotion grabbed the steering wheel and called itself instinct. Dishonesty edited the receipts until the story sounded brave. The herd offered anesthesia, not edge. Free food turned out to be bait. Impatience worshipped entries and forgot outcomes. The pattern is not mysterious. The account did not bleed from one fatal blow. It bled from tiny cuts protected by pretty language. Here is the shape of a mind that does not leak. It treats enough as a boundary, not a slogan. It treats other people's trades as weather, not law. It treats feelings like background noise that never gets the keyboard. It treats the journal as a courtroom where opinions sit quietly and timestamps do the talking. It treats the crowd as a reference, not a babysitter. It treats advice as raw material, not an order. It treats flat as a position that preserves oxygen. None of that is heroic. It is brutally unromantic, which is why it works. You wanted harsh truth without decoration, so take this straight. The market does not punish greed. It punishes drift. The market does not punish emotion. It punishes negotiation against your own rules. The market does not punish impatience. It punishes the arithmetic that follows impatience. Every problem you listed becomes lethal only when it is allowed to redefine the terms mid-trade. The moment terms move, you are no longer executing. You are daydreaming with leverage. Daydreams with leverage end one way. Notice what binds the entire list. Every flaw is a custody problem. Who holds your decision when it hurts you or the feed? Who holds your exits when the number looks small, you or your envy of someone else's screenshot? Who holds your memory when shame knocks you, or the story that protects your pride? Who holds your size when volatility spikes you, or the herd's borrowed certainty? If custody keeps drifting outward, discipline turns into theater. If custody stays inward, variance looks like weather, not fate. So what does inward custody actually sound like on a screen crowded with noise? It sounds like a finish line spoken in plain numbers before the first click. It sounds like risk framed in one fixed unit that does not stretch to comfort an ego. It sounds like invalidation that does not beg for a second chance. It sounds like partial exits that do not apologize for being smaller than fantasy. It sounds like a record that does not care whether you looked smart. It only cares whether you were consistent. That voice is not loud. It is stubborn. That is enough. If there is an alternative approach, it is not a new trick. It is subtraction. Subtract the audience from your timing. Subtract the adrenaline from your risk. Subtract the story from your review. Subtract the constant need to touch the market from your definition of progress. What remains is quiet. Quiet is where the finish line is visible, where envy has nothing to feed on, where emotion is noticed but not obeyed, where honesty feels less like punishment and more like maintenance, where the crowd becomes a temperature check, and where patience is not a virtue but a budget. You already wrote the map without realizing it. 1. Stop treating appetite as a plan. 2. Stop letting other people's wins define your self-respect. 3. Stop letting feelings manage risk under the 5. Disguise of instinct. 4. Stop editing receipts to protect the brand. 5. Stop outsourcing conviction to the herd and calling it community. 6. Stop eating free calls and calling it efficiency. 7. Stop confusing busyness with progress. The list is not 7 battles. It is one battlefield with 7 entrances. Close the entrances, and the same edge you keep almost touching becomes repeatable instead of mythical. Here is the razor edge to carry forward. Every click either pays the identity you broadcast or the method you can prove. Those two are rarely the same. Pick one. If the method gets paid, the account stops bleeding and the noise stops feeling like judgment. If the identity gets paid, the feed will love you right up to the moment your balance begs for silence. Either way, the market will keep doing what it does, auctioning fear and hope, while you decide whether today is another donation or the day the leaks finally get sealed. If this hit home, share it with your buddies who keep negotiating with their own stops. Subscribe to Mind Over Markets so you do not miss these razor-sharp breakdowns delivered without fluff, without babysitting, and without mercy. Bring your receipts. Next time. The chart will